Next up, we have a really fantastic panel with my dude, Sam Heisel, the founder and CEO of Vox, which helps musicians and brands build their audiences online. Come on up, Sam.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. Everybody, how's it going? Okay, that was dead as hell. Everybody, how's it going? Awesome. Super excited to have this panel today. We are going to be talking about how to hack culture, gaining mindshare in a crowded world. We have some incredible guests that I'm going to be bringing up to the stage. First and foremost, we have Kaitlyn Barclay. She's the CEO of Scout Lab, which is a creative agency at the intersection of brand and social. She sold her last startup to ClassPass and has done amazing work with brands like Alibaba, Adidas, and more. So super fortunate to have her here as well. If you want to come up, Kaitlyn, woot woot. And then on top of Kaitlyn, we will also have Gabriel Whaley. Gabe runs a company called MSCHF Internet Studios. They do some really incredible work. They essentially make brands infamous overnight. So they've been able to generate over 1 billion impressions for their brands through the content and different marketing campaigns they've run without spending any money on paid media. So I think a lot of us default and think that it's a pay-to-play game. If you're not running boosting content with paid media, it's really hard to get a lot of impressions and engagement. I think Gabe has really flipped that model upside down. So with that said, before we jump into the panel, we'd really like to define what culture is. I think it's a broad topic. I think if brands are able to really authentically connect with the culture and tap into the culture and what they do, it's a very powerful thing. It's also very easy to not do it well. So before we jump into it, first of all, welcome, guys. And I'd love to hear how you guys define culture, if you want to start it off.
Awesome. Thank you for the introductions. So I think culture is a really interesting topic. The way that I would think about culture is it's a lens. It's a way that we view the world, right? And there is the individual culture of which we all exist. That is our own lens. And then there is the lens that becomes an aggregate when we join a community. And that can mean many things, right? It can be food, music. It can be an experience that we both connect to or with. So I think of it as an individual lens. And then when you join a community, it's now the lens that you create together.
Cool. Yeah, at its most root definition, culture is just like what's cool versus what's not, like what is not cool. But to like dive a little bit deeper into how I look at that and how we look at that at MSCHF, it's basically like looking at context on top of a certain framework. The framework is actually very specific. So if you look through like the beginning of time, humans have always been obsessed with discovering and sharing content that reflects you as an individual, right? So like at the beginning, you have cave paintings, you have smoke signals, you have the Pony Express, and now we have DMs and Instagram and everything else, right? So that's sort of the framework that we're looking at, but the context that we apply to that is what are people seeking out, what kind of content are they looking to discover, and then how do they share it? And to me, that's a very granular way to look at culture because, as I'm sure we'll get into later on in this panel, how do you find the right idea to ride culture and basically earn prestige and earn fame?
For sure. Very well said. So I think we want to go a mix of high-level defining culture, but make this very tactical for you guys so you can really walk away with some interesting tidbits on how you can hack culture and really unlock growth in your business through cultural relevance. So in kind of taking on that definition of culture, can you guys share some specific examples of either campaigns you've run or other brands you've seen do it really well when it comes to hacking culture and doing it well? If you want to start off, Kaitlyn?
Yeah, for sure. So I think an interesting way to think about developing culture is from an internal lens and through an external lens. And I think where a lot of brands who are just indexing on being cool or relevant lose is they are only thinking about that external lens. So they're trying to be relevant without being authentic, or really thinking strategically about what they're trying to say through this timely story that they're trying to participate in. So, for example, Adidas is a client. They're really having a moment where they're a legacy brand and they're coming back to life. And they're looking at it from an internal out. So they already have this cool consumer brand. But if they want to extend the success that they're seeing, then they have to take that culture and internalize it. And so what that means for them is looking at tactical programs within the organization, making sure, Bonin said it really well, but that they're finding trajectories to elevate people that will keep them ahead. Looking at diversity and inclusion issues, which like every Fortune 1000 company has problems with. And so we came in and we created programs around kind of like key staples of this internal culture that they wanted to elevate to then promote this external culture. So like they're this big creator brand, so how are they building in leadership programs, creativity programs to promote that culture within? And then, and I would say just very briefly, we're talking to a lot of companies, big and small, that want to be relevant, and we're looking at how do you take these things that are maybe taboo and reframing them. So what's top of mind is like 420 is coming up, and that's a really interesting moment to reapproach the trope of cannabis, who it's made for, like how do you position it, For example, cannabis has like always been a part of stoner culture, but if you look at what cannabis or CBD is used for, solving symptoms with anxiety and depression, endometriosis, these are all things that are like kind of like predisposed to the female experience. So how are we reformatting, redefining these topics that maybe brands were afraid to talk about before?
Yeah, so I mean I don't think we're as in depth we don't have the breadth of thinking about that. Mostly the way we look at writing culture and building on top of that is kind of like, okay, what's going on? How can we make fun of it a little bit? Or just like have fun. At the end of the day, I'm a huge troll. That's how I got into the business, and all I'm trying to figure out is how to get brands to pay me to do what I was already going to do. So an example of us just sort of like riding the cultural wave, because for me, that was basically path of least resistance. How do you get started? Ride culture. Why do the work when the world is doing most of the work? So if you guys remember a little while back when bots were really hot, they really are not hot right now. So this is an example of how one thing was culture and then it became not culture. Our founding client was Casper, the mattress company that takes over your podcasts. So back then we were thinking, okay, like what is the thing that people are thinking about? What are the insights? What are the emotional sort of problems that people are facing? And we're like, okay, well, there is this thing about, you stress out on a Sunday night because you want to go to sleep. You know you need to get a good night's sleep, and you psych yourself out so you can't go to sleep, right? And then you end up feeling lonely. You're kind of depressed, but there's no one else to talk to. So we took that insight and we bucketed it in one place, and then we're like, okay, now what's the delivery mechanism? What is culture doing right now so that we can deliver this insight to the masses? And we managed to put two and two together, and we decided, hey, let's build a chat bot that doesn't work during the day. So if you text it between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m., it'll just be like, hey, sorry, really busy right now, maybe later. But if you text it anytime after 11 p.m., it'll respond, it'll talk about anything you want, it'll keep a conversation going, and ultimately provide that weird layer of human-esque comfort that you weren't going to get otherwise. So that was simply us sort of like taking an insight, identifying the cultural wave, and then writing it. And because of that, we were able to get all the impressions, and impressions isn't really the right word. It's more like we were able to channel the culture and then reflect the hype onto our client, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So how do you do it? Is there a process you guys deploy within your businesses to go about identifying interesting cultural waves to ride and how to ride them? I mean, can you guys talk about the process side of hacking culture, if you will?
Totally. So I think it's reframing. So PR, I think, is getting like a total makeover. And one thing that is so like crucial with PR is crisis management. But thinking about like, how do you enact that for social media, right? Like, what are the moments that you can expect are coming up, whether that's like events, South by Southwest, or if that's like a funny holiday, or if that's like these cultural moments that are happening all throughout the year that you can plan for. And then how do you create a strategy around, again, I use crisis management as an example, but how do you create a strategy around the way we react in real time, and the pillars of which we evaluate if that reaction is good for our brand. And so I think always having that lens, so that when you do have these incredible moments, and Insomniabot was
Insomniabot.
That's awesome. You're making sure that you're talking to the right person in the right way, that's advancing your brand forward, because it's so easy to be regressive if you don't have those pillars in place before you're responding.
Totally. And we could use more of those pillars because we've gotten in trouble a couple of times. So the real simple framework that we've sort of put in place, and it is always evolving, because the thing to remember is the rate at which we discover and share information is changing faster and faster each day. So frameworks that worked yesterday might not work tomorrow, but hopefully we've sort of gotten pretty close. The framework is essentially this. Step 1, identify what the social/emotional problem is. Ideally, it's a problem that reflects both components. Step 2, map a solution that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but it addresses the problem. So in the Insomniabot example, Insomniabot doesn't solve your insomnia, but it addresses it in a way that makes the brand feel more human, more relatable, right? And then step 3 is just get it out there, and that's probably the part of the strategy that's always changing, because 2 years ago when we launched that, Instagram stories didn't even exist, right? So like the mediums and the methods are always changing, but when we stick to that framework, and then more importantly, create a culture of basically no bad ideas, and create a culture that encourages risk and encourages mistakes. If we have an employee who doesn't make a royal fucking mistake in like the first 3 months of them working with us, I have to sit down and have a talk and be like, I don't think you're triggering enough of your coworkers. I don't think you're pushing us, because you should feel empowered here to royally mess up in a way that no other job would ever let you get away with.
Yeah. I think a lot of the work that you've done, I mean, you really do push original thinking and coming up with some really compelling ideas. Can you talk a little bit more about how you really create an environment where awesome ideas come up, and how you push your team? I think that's something all marketers want to do, but to the extent that you can really create an environment where it's likely to occur is a powerful thing.
Totally. So, to be honest, I actually have not perfected it by any means. The last 3 years that we've been in business, it was actually kind of terrible, because as we grew, I realized we were starting to silo different functions in the organization, from like sales to creative and ideation to production and to distribution. But at the end of the day, on the outside, like if you look at our website, we look like this rogue creative place that produces all the ideas that get killed at big agencies. Which we are, but there's a lot of pain and tears and suffering on the inside that I had to get rid of. And I realized, no matter if you're a developer or a producer or an account manager, anyone who's working at MSCHF is there because they love the idea, and we're just not big enough to make mistakes like siloing people and keeping them away from the idea. So I got married last year. I went on my honeymoon. I sort of had this awakening moment where I was like, all right, this ends the day I get back. So I actually show up in the office and I say, okay, we're transitioning to 4-day work weeks. We are not working on Fridays, but show up, no laptops. I'm bringing breakfast, I'm bringing lunch, and we're going to embark on this 1-month experiment called MSCHF Madness, where it's a pure idea hackathon for the entire team, where we spend 30 minutes over bagels, slinging insights, just sharing stories along a theme. Then we break off into pairs, people go brainstorm, they can go to a bar, they can go to a coffee shop, they come back, and then we have lunch while doing demo day, which is more like stand-up comedy than an actual pitch. And the reason the Friday works is because we are brainstorming in a framework where there is no deadline, there is no client breathing down our necks. The Fridays are sacred, everyone participates, and what I learned is, A, team unity has exploded. It's been incredible. And B, our ideas are actually better. And I didn't expect that. It was kind of a team-building effort to fix our culture, but it turns out a good culture with the right people does lead to that result that you want. And that was sort of honestly, it kept me from shutting down the company last year. So that was
Wow, well done.
Thank God.
Well played. So when it comes to identifying cultural trends, I think there's almost two camps and there's overlap, but you have the intuitive side where it's just you pay attention as an active consumer, as somebody that may be a part of kind of the culture upon which you're trying to create with. On the other side, there's this very more quantitative, qualitative, research-centric approach, using listening tools, doing customer interviews. Do you guys think it's good to have a balance? Do you have a preference and skew intuitive versus a more research-centric approach? What do you think?
Yeah, so we always do our homework before, and then we react later. So I think being very consumer-centric up front has always been really helpful to us. And then, yeah, I think being very reactive, again, like on the lens that you've developed with your team. I also, I love the way that you structure your workday. One of our clients is Automatic, and it's a fully distributed team across the world. And Matt Mullenweg, the CEO, has some incredible insight on what that journey has looked like for Automatic, which I implore you guys to check out if you are interested in that. But what that's really enabled is this. As long as you have great ideas and do the work, it doesn't matter how you live your life. And in fact, the more multidimensional your life is, the better the work gets. So I think that's cultivating that type of culture across your team will make it so if you've done your homework about the consumer, you're going to come up with better ideas because you're allowing people to be the fullest expression of themselves instead of what they are 9 to 5 FaceTime in an office experience, which everyone kind of learns to resent.
Yeah. 100% that is the right answer. At MSCHF, I try to cultivate this environment where people can be the truest versions of themselves, and that is our best bet to nailing the right idea to right culture. I also say that as an excuse. I don't know what the right social listening tool is, and maybe if I use that, we'd be a bigger business, or not bigger, we'd be a better business. But at the end of the day, it is truly all about the people that you have and the environment that you put them in. A very concrete example of that is, most recently, in my opinion, too many of our employee base lived within walking distance of our office in New York. That's cool, it's been the dream for a while, but I actually think it hinders creativity because true creativity comes through what I believe is pain and suffering. So we are moving the office so that everyone has to ride the subway. Because life is too good for us to get that tunnel vision, and I need everyone working at MSCHF to actually be touching culture, or being touched by it, or witnessing it or experiencing it. You have to be in it. We can't simply experience life through the lens of our phones and through computers. You have to be in it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think it reminds me of the stuff you did with Adidas in the sense of really trying to make sure you're taking this internal people-centric approach because they're the people that deeply understand, the people you're trying to reach, and then you could rely a little bit more on their intuition. So some brands culturally appropriate and do it poorly. How do you think brands can avoid that? Authenticity, stuff like that comes into play. So, preventing appropriation, partnering the right way, how do you prevent that from happening?
So I think this is why I exist or my company exists because a couple of things happened 2 years ago that really lit me up. And I talk about this a lot, but these massive brands are appropriating cultural movements in the most inappropriate way. They're multi-million-dollar campaigns. So Pepsi is appropriating Black Lives Matter. Dove is whitewashing its product. You have BIC offering a pink product and saying for women, as though there's an equation here are your Uggs, here's your outdoor voices, go be insecure. Females. That's not an intelligent way to look at a consumer. And then Trump was elected. So me and my co-founder at a bar over a lot of wine were this is ridiculous. Just do your homework. Talk to your consumer. Build teams that look like your consumer. And I think when we get into these larger companies, being very honest, we always have to give weird feedback that they've never heard before, which I think is such a shame because we have so much opportunity being an external partner, which is ultimately being a mirror to these organizations. So saying women in tech isn't an issue, you're just not promoting them or hiring them. We've had to say in like one massive company in particular, like, you don't need to hire more women, you just need to promote the ones that exist, because women are not a minority. You have minority issues. Women is not one of them. You're just not promoting them into leadership. So I think having representative teams, doing your homework on your consumer, and then again having those pillars of how we act, what is the culture of our reaction, is a way that you just don't make these totally avoidable, like completely regressive mistakes.
Definitely. Our internal saying is "Don't force a meme," and that has much larger than life implications if you really think about it. But at the end of the day, when it comes to brands, a simple lens to look at the work that you put out is it for the people that you actually represent? And if it's not, even if like you have to ask that question, then it's probably not a good idea. And in a lot of those cases, I'll tell the brands that we're working with or people working at brands that I'm just talking to that it's just not worth it. You don't have to go with this idea because there are countless ideas out there. You just got to find the right one. So,
for sure. So one other thing within this category of hacking culture, I mean stories. Storytelling is how it calcifies culture. It helps us create meaning around our perspectives around certain things. And then in a more social age, I mean, to the extent that we can tell good stories, we'll define how well people are likely to respond and resonate and share what we're creating. So how do you guys think about storytelling from a marketing perspective? How do you leverage storytelling in an impactful way?
Totally. So the way I think about it is the methods of storytelling have actually largely been the same for about the last century. It's either some combination of spoken word, written word, static image, or moving image. And that's like referring to print ads or like TV spots or videos or podcasts like that. The content, while great, is generally two-dimensional. Now, when the internet came about, I think there was a cool time in the 90s and the early 2000s where people really started to tap into the creative power of unlimited world-building experiential opportunity. Unfortunately, the platforms are killing that for the sake of easier distribution. But one thing I like to say in the office is the internet is basically this infinite color palette, but right now we're only really painting with about 6 of those colors. There's so much more that you can do. And so how can we tap the creative power of the internet from both the distribution platform but also creative medium to tell stories delivered in the form of experiences that lead people to share their own stories about the experiences. And you see that manifest in something like an Insomnobot, which is an experience, or like this, we created a home security Alexa skill last year called Away Mode that just played hours of infuriatingly banal, boring conversations to make your home too awkward to deal for burglars, right? And that was purely inspired from Home Alone. So it's like, what are these different pieces of the internet that we can put together to tell a cohesive story and just delivered in a format that's more relevant to how we live right now?
Amazing.
Yeah, no, and to go off of that too, I think, so the way that we think about storytelling is very much like from the top down. So you have your brand strategy, which is like your ethos, like what is your message? What is your like belong anywhere or like just do it? And then from there, everything kind of inserts itself. So, and it's interesting too, because I think what you bring up is like in the moment content is so important and be willing to tell these stories. And it's not to say like have these guardrails around the way that you react so that it limits your reaction. It's like, no, offend people, offend the right people, right? You see a lot of purpose-driven campaigns right now, like Nike with Kaepernick, genius. Like, yeah, if you want to have a consumer segment hate you, for sure have it be racist. Or like Bumble with Serena Williams. Like if you want to be, if you want to tell a strong message, just make sure that you're getting the right people to hate you, if that makes sense. It's not to limit yourselves by having these frameworks on your reactions to be shy. it's to say, make sure that these cultural values are in place so that you're telling the right stories, you're on the right side of history.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. I mean, being comfortable and taking that risk. So let's get super tactical. I want you guys to make some recommendations. When you guys talk with different startups, when you're talking with different companies, big brands, what are some of the biggest mistakes you're seeing them make right off the bat that you want to really come in there and solve for?
Yeah, I got some. The easiest and most hilarious one is CMOs and their innovation budgets. Horrible idea. So many large brands come to us saying, can you help us put together our AR or our VR strategy? Or when Pokemon Go happened, I can't tell you how many brands came and said, what's our full stop on everything else, what's our Pokemon Go strategy? And the thing is, like, these are excuses for a lack of original thinking. Investing in a VR strategy for your marketing to relate to who? Who can I go out on the street who will even understand the difference between VR and AR, much less experience the stories that you're telling in that medium? No, it's an excuse that represents a lack of original thinking. And I don't put it that harshly, but those dollars can be put to better use. I mean, it's like what Bonin was saying earlier. It's how do you actually just put in the actual work to think and have a point of view, like you're saying. Like, if you're going to offend someone, offend the right people, invest in that thinking. Don't invest in innovation, because innovation doesn't mean anything right now. Relevance is where it's at, and that's where it's always going to be.
Amen.
Great. Final questions. Do you think we can, I feel like a lot of your approach is around like viral stuff, viral content. Can you engineer virality, or is there just a lot left to luck?
It's like, we've all heard the spray and pray approach. Yeah, it's just you take a lot of swings, and over time you just get better at it. It's kind of like, I don't really play sports anymore, but it's kind of like being an athlete or really any skill. You practice, you make mistakes, you fuck it up, you pick yourself back up, you recover, and slowly but surely you just start to hone your senses, and you start to get a knack for, like, okay, I know if I put that piece together with that piece, it's going to take off. And if it doesn't, well, I'll admit that I failed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much. I think really awesome conversation. Great to get your guys' perspectives. I think for me, really deeply understanding your customer, being comfortable taking risks, telling meaningful stories that resonate with people on an emotional level. I think those are all super powerful things. So thank you guys for sharing and for doing this kind of work. And thank all you guys. And we are done. Thank you.
Thanks.